Good evening. And welcome to the Westmont Downtown Lecture Series, Conversations About Things That Matter. I'm Bobby Kinnear, and I'm a member of the Westmont Foundation Board. It's Westmont Foundation Board that sponsors Westmont Downtown Lecture Series, which began over 18 years ago. The series highlights important topics of the day and the most amazing Westmont faculty, and it brings the information to all of you. The series is a gift to our community. The goal for those who attend is to enjoy meaningful, fundamental, and lively conversations. This series consists of 4 intriguing faculty discussions per year. May I ask how many have attended this program before? Raise your hands. Oh, very nice, very nice. And those who are new, will you come back? Yes, okay. So don't be shy, and do ask many questions of our fine speakers after they speak. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Kimberly Deneau, and she in turn will introduce our amazing speaker tonight, Dr. Gayle Beebe, President of Westmont College. Dr. Kim Deneau is the Provost and Dean of Faculty at Westmont. She joined Westmont August 2022, just yesterday, and has over 25 years of experience in executive leadership in Christian higher education. Previously, Kim worked as Vice President for Educational Programs for the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities in Washington, D.C. She spent much of her career at Azusa Pacific University as Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer. In addition to serving on local and national committees and boards, Kim has taught undergraduate and graduate students on 5 continents. Kim earned a Doctor of Philosophy in Sociology at the University of Florida, a Master of Social Work from Temple University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology at Vanguard University. Oh, did I mention that Kim is a 2-time Fulbright Scholar? Born and raised in Los Angeles, Kim joyfully returns to California with Johannes, her husband, for 16 years, and their 3 children. Kim works closely with us in the Westmont Foundation Board in coordinating these special lectures. Thank you, Kim. We are very grateful for your experience and your assistance. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bobby, for that generous introduction. I am just looking out at this amazing crowd, and I would love for you to look at your neighbor and say, "You're in for a treat tonight." Tonight it is my honor to introduce our president. So let me tell you a little bit about this amazing leader. Dr. Gayle Beebe became the 8th president of Westmont College in 2007 and has held leadership positions in higher education for over 33 years. He completed a Doctor of Philosophy and a Master's degree of Philosophy of Religion and Theology at Claremont College, Graduate University, and also earned an MBA in Strategic Management from the Peter Drucker School of Management at Claremont. He received his Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and earned his undergraduate degree from George Fox University in Oregon. He spent a wonderful semester as an exchange student at Westmont, and as God would bring it back full circle, he would become the leader. An active scholar, he has written or edited 10 books and more than 40 articles, including The Shaping of an Effective Leader, Longing for God, which was also co-authored with Richard Foster, and The Crucibles That Shape Us, which he will actually talk about tonight. Early in his tenure, Dr. Beebe launched a strategic planning process at Westmont that has produced significant results in many areas, including establishing a strong financial base for the college, building essential new facilities, creating exciting new academic programs, and raising substantial funds to accomplish several ambitious goals. Seeking to address the challenges facing private higher education in the 21st century, the college has pursued a range of innovative and initiatives that have extended Westmont's reach and influence. These include centers addressing critical issues, such as the Martin Institute for Christianity and Culture, the Dallas Willard Center for Spiritual Formation, and 5 centers associated with the Global Leadership Center: the Mosier Center for Moral and Ethical Leadership, the Hughes Center for Neuroscience and Leadership, the Global Center for Diversity and Global Learning, the Eaton Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, the Montecito Institute for Executive Education, and the Carol Houston Center for Biblical Justice and Reconciliation. During his tenure, the growing emphasis on innovation has led to the expansion of Westmont's global offerings, the establishment of Westmont Downtown, you have to visit, and the introduction of a new major in mechanical engineering and an accelerated Bachelor of Science in Nursing, or ABSN program. 3 significant capital campaigns have raised more than $400 million and provided the financial resources to build new and renovate existing facilities, as well as new athletic fields and facilities. These campaigns have been instrumental and have helped the college acquire buildings at 26 and 29 Anapamu, the 2 buildings that house Westmont Downtown. Now, on a personal note, Dr. Beebe and his wife, Pam, who is here with us tonight, have been married for over 35 years and have 3 adult children who all graduated from Westmont. They are also the new grandparents of little Woodrow, also known as Woody. As I'm wrapping up, I just want to say there are leaders, and then there are just people who lead with a servant's heart. That is President Beebe. He is a strong leader, but he really has a compassionate heart. And I think if more people knew that, it's just an amazing person. He's an amazing person to serve under and to work with. His wife, Pam, just amazing. They are amazing co-partners, and you're going to hear again from this amazing leader tonight. So would you please join me in welcoming President Gayle Beebe.
Thank you so much, and Kim, a wonderful, gracious introduction. Peter Drucker once said that all good plans eventually degenerate into hard work, and I think that's really what we have felt. Is that I have loved the planning, but plans don't count unless they get executed, and we've had an opportunity to execute on a number of fronts and have really enjoyed it. This is my first time in the space. I know we've done a few downtown lecture series, but I've been traveling when they've happened, so it's wonderful to actually see the space, having heard about it. Love the garage door as the way you can throw open the doors, or the walls. We have some accordion walls on campus that open up into the outdoors, and it's always really fun. What we're going to consider tonight is the basic content of the Crucibles That Shape Us, and then we'll take time to amplify one of the paths and conclude with as many questions as you'd like to ask. And the ones that we can't get answered, I'll answer via email on follow-up, but just hope that we can really enjoy the conversation tonight. I started thinking about writing the book during one of our Lead Where You Stand conferences. This happens every June, and a person who's a longtime friend of the college said to me, you know, have you ever thought about writing a book? A lot of bad things have happened since you arrived. And the look that came over my face, you know, must have been startling, because he said, that came out wrong. Let me rephrase that. But in fact, a lot of challenging things have happened, and I've had the privilege of getting to lead during a time that required a lot of energy and a lot of adaptation to respond, and some of that was obvious and natural, and some of it was just the result of what our country has been going through and the way in which national realities always have a local expression, and those came to Westmont. Well, let me get underway. Here are the 7 chapter headings, and basically what I was trying to do was to look at the ways in which I understand my work as a leader. And what had occurred on some fronts were literally experiences that take you 30 years to understand. At other times, there are simple disasters that you have to respond to. So the crucible of mismeaning is the first one, and it's really getting at how do we actually look and see, how do we perceive, and I'll comment on each of them momentarily. But one of the things I was wanting to get at with the crucible of mismeaning is the fact that Daniel Kahneman has this concept that the acronym stands for what you see is all there is. And he says this is the tendency we all have to show up in a situation, believe that we can intuitively understand it, and whatever response we make is an accurate one. And he said the reality is that's almost never the case. The reality is we end up in situations that we think we easily understand, and we don't. And we make decisions that actually complicate, if not corrupt, the situation and make it much more difficult. The second one is the crucible of enduring challenge, and I'm going to that'll be the one that I elaborate further. And this is just strictly the recognition that many of the situations or circumstances we find ourselves in require perseverance. And they just require a determination to outlast whatever the problem is in order to be sure that your institution isn't harmed and that, in fact, it rebounds. The third one, the crucible of human treachery, this is about human betrayal. And just the reality that this happens in every organization, and the fact that it's often a complicating factor in every organization. So how can we recognize it? How can we discern it? And then how can we respond as constructively as possible? The crucible of awakened moral conscience is about Martin Luther King Jr. and the way in which each of us come to a moment when we awaken to what our responsibility or calling is in life. And this can come at any number of times for any number of reasons. And we'll look at Martin Luther King Jr., Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Simone Weil to illustrate the points. Number 5, the crucible of social conflict, is looking both at the life of John Lewis, the protege to MLK, but also a book that came out in 2020 called Upswing by Robert Putnam, a famous sociologist that taught his career at Harvard University. And the basic premise of Upswing is a recognition that we've been on about a 120-year cycle that dates back to the 1890s, and the best way to understand it is what he calls an I-we-I curve. Started out very self-centered in the 1890s, kind of grew up until the early 70s with great communitarian efforts, and then somewhere in the early to mid 70s started to turn back into a very self-centered culture and society, and what that has come to look like and how that's actually contributed to so many of the social conflicts. Sixth one, the crucible of human suffering, looks at natural disasters, the Montecito debris flow, the Tea Fire, the Thomas Fire, the fact that we often experience almost the arbitrariness of nature. And number 6 is actually one that was part of my own spiritual and intellectual journey. Coming to, I wanted to understand how a loving God could permit so much evil and suffering. And that was a 5-year period of reading and really pondering, and then just the ways in which God resolved that for me. and the importance of resolving questions we carry at points in time so that they can help us as we face other challenges later in time. And then also want to look at suffering at the hands of people who are just inherently evil, and then suffering at the hands of terminal illness and sudden loss. And then the last one, the crucible of personal choice, is the reality that we often end up in situations that, like it or not, are mostly a result of choices we have made. And we wish we could blame them on other people or on God, but really they're our own fault. And so how do we begin to come to terms with that? With that, let me start with the first one, The Crucible of Missed Meaning. This is a book by, The Culture Map is a book by Erin Meyer, and we have brought Erin to campus 3 times via the big screen. She's an American who married a Parisian. She lives in Paris. She teaches at INSEAD, the famous business school, and she wrote this book, The Culture Map, and I just love it. It is just an award-winning, groundbreaking work. And what she was trying to answer was, her first assignment at INSEAD was pairing global executives with new assignments in a country different than their country of origin. And she could not figure out why so many failed. All of these placements, and she said it was about 50-50 whether it would succeed or fail, and she wanted to understand why some succeeded and others failed. And so she began to look at all of these different dimensions and identifies 8 dimensions that every basic public part of a society or culture, in other words, the business culture, 8 areas in which people operate. And she said one of the things that you notice is English as a language is a low context country. And what she means by that is English is meant to be very clear so that it operates equally well in virtually any country. A high context language is like Japanese, where the same word can mean 5 different things depending on the context and the culture. And she said, in a high context country, you have to learn to, quote unquote, read the air. Now, I use this book when I'm teaching executive leadership to say, you may never live outside the United States, but every time you change organizations or companies, you change cultures. See Roy Millender tonight. Roy used to teach in our E&B department. Roy, it's great to have you, but Roy used to amplify these ideas of how do you go between cultures to actually understand them and recognize that they operate quite differently. And then the other is thinking fast and slow. We've had Daniel Kahneman to campus twice. He just passed away this last year at age 91. Born in Paris, was born shortly before the rise of Hitler and just the occupation of France. They fled, eventually landing in Palestine, and in those days called Palestine, now Israel. But obviously raised as a Jewish, devout Jew, became nominalized or nominal, even though he has grandfathers on both sides who are famous rabbinic scholars. It's fascinating to talk to him. But he wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, as a popular version of the work he and his co-collaborator, Amos Tversky, both social psychologists, they won the Nobel Prize in Economics for this work. And basically what the work is showing is how people make economic decisions. And it very much went against the grain of contemporary thought. It said people don't make economic decisions primarily on profit maximization. They make them primarily on loss avoidance. And he went through identifying all of the various ways that we develop bias that influences our decisions. And so what Kahneman came up with was the acronym that stands for what you see is all there is, and this tendency we have to operate in a way that is very self-centered, believing that we literally can see and interpret things no matter what context we drop into. The second one is the Crucible of Enduring Challenge. Now, if you've known me very long, you know I attended Winston Churchill High School in Eugene, Oregon, where I was born and raised. And we had a fantastic high school in terms of the education, but we had a fantastic English teacher. Her name was Miss Brunken. And Miss Brunken, I had her all 3 years, had her for English 10 as a sophomore, had her for whatever the English 11 would be, and then college composition as a senior. But she would give you extra credit if you could pair the insult Churchill made with who he made it to as on every quiz and test. And so it just gave us, she would have us read so many little snippets of Churchill's writings, and it just gave us a love and appreciation for Winston Churchill. So one of his many lines are, I mean, it's almost endless. When you're going through hell, keep going. And I think what a great summative way to talk about perseverance. Now I'm going to come back to number 2, so we'll skip ahead to number 3, the crucible of human treachery. This was interesting. So when I wrote the first draft of the book and turned it in, the VP of InterVarsity Press, who's also the acquisitions editor, named Cindy Bunch. And I've worked with Cindy on on Longing for God and the Shaping of an Effective Leader. And so we've known each other for about 20 years. And she said the 2 chapters that really challenged her in a good way were chapter 3 on human treachery and chapter 6 on human suffering. And particularly what she was taken by was this idea of envy, that there's 2 types of envy. One is just the kind of general type where we resent the gifts somebody else has. But the much more treacherous form of envy is schadenfreude. And it's this term that's gained greater currency and essentially arises in the 20th century, which means not just that you resent the gifts God has given somebody else, you set out to destroy them. And so you literally begin to harbor ill will and function in a way that you're not just going to stymie a person's expression of their gifts, you're literally going to destroy their capacity. And the recognition that this actually begins to show up in organizations and with really destructive impact and effect. And so the part of what I deploy in the chapter is a book that's called How the Way We Talk Can Change the Way We Work. And this was written by 2 Harvard professors looking at the personal languages we develop and the social languages we develop and the way in which those actually contribute to either clarity of thought or confusion and really treachery. And then often difficult circumstances aren't ones that we create, but ones we have to respond to. And we have to figure out how we'll do it in a way that doesn't destroy the organization or the community. Now the next one is a picture of MLK, the day of I Have a Dream speech. And this quote I really appreciate from Mark Twain: the 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you figure out why. And we often talk at Westmont about we're here to help you answer that second part of the question, the day you figure out why. Now MLK realized reluctantly that he was being called to leadership of the civil rights movement as it emerged in the 40s and 50s. He was still in the home or going through his educational experience. In the 50s, he was actually pastoring, and then he would eventually settle into the pastoral ministry with his father in Atlanta, having migrated from Birmingham, and really went through a process. It was not clear, but one of the things that's so striking to me when you read his writings, as well as so many things that continue to be written about him, is the entire time that he was providing leadership for the civil rights movement, he was experiencing multiple death threats. People were trying to kill him. They wanted to kill him. They tried to blow up his house. They tried to sabotage his car. And I even when he went to Memphis, there had been death threats ahead of what turned out to be his assassination. But I think literally about running a college, never having been threatened. Never, you show up, you feel enough pressure as there is, and I literally can't imagine what it must have felt like to have a wife and young children and be under constant threat that not only would you be denied the right to lead, but you might invariably be killed. Of course, he would end up dying at age 39. And to this day, he continues to be an amazing example of somebody who faced enormous odds and pushed through them. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, of course, has become well known for his courage during the rise of Hitler and the efforts that he made with the German resistance. And then Simone Weil is a less known but important French philosopher who was raised as a secular Jew, became a follower of Christ through the poetry of George Herbert, and wrote so eloquently about the spiritual life. And one of my favorite books is Gravity and Grace, and this is where she uses the illustration where she compares the sun to the love of God. And she said, just as the sun is the only power in the natural universe that can get a plant to grow against gravity, so the love of God is the only power in the spiritual universe that can get a human to grow against the gravity of their egocentrism. And it's just such an interesting and memorable illustration of what we should look for in the spiritual life, and that the love of God is meant to transform us and help us overcome our own egocentrism, not reinforce it. The fifth one, the crucible of social conflict. The four areas that Putnam really amplifies in Upswing is economic inequality, political polarization, social dislocation, and cultural narcissism. And he writes in his effort is to show how in the 1890s this was very true. It currently is very true. Meanwhile, there was a huge swing upward of literally trying to take care of people, trying to build a stronger community, and then how can we recover? And his goal is how do we get back to a more communitarian ideal? John Lewis is a wonderful example of this, and of course John Lewis would die during the rise of the race conversation in our society during the spring and summer of 2020. And these are just a brief timeline of different experiences that I've had along the way. Pam and I lived in Southern California when the Rodney King riots, or the riots that are a result of the beating of Rodney King. And I think anyone who was California-based would remember 1992 and those riots. They actually started on my birthday, on April 29th. And so Pam was coming home she was teaching middle school math at the time, and they had taken the 8th graders to Washington, D.C. This was before, you could go online and find everything. And so she was supposed to land at LAX on the 30th. The 29th, the city had been set on fire. And so I drove into LAX. I remember coming down Century Boulevard. I come to a stoplight, and there are no cars on the road. And here crossing in front of me is a black male. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. And we both, what is going to happen? I could sense that he was apprehensive as I was. Well, he crossed. There was no incident. I got up to the hotel where they had redirected us. They would not open the door. They said the plane had been rerouted to Ontario, and so I headed out to Ontario. If you know that area, it's about 60 miles east of LAX. But it was just such an apprehensive time. And as we came out of that, there were just a number of learnings that continued to inform us. And then we cycled back into a really painful period because of the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis. And so even now, I think about what can we learn that's consistent with the religious and faith commitments of the college that really do believe God creating all people and endowing each of us with his image, and with the shared responsibility, how do we actually develop the gifts and abilities of those under our care and influence? And so often think about that. The Crucible of Human Suffering. Summer of '82, I actually did an internship at Reedwood Friends Church in Portland, Oregon. It's right near Reed College, if you're familiar with that famous liberal arts college. And I worked with a wonderful pastor named Don Green, and Don had gone to Princeton Seminary, and I was headed to Princeton, and so Don had really become just a mentor and friend. He was only 32. That fall, just 6 weeks into my first semester, he would be killed in a tragic accident on Mount Hood. He had gone up to the Zigzag Ranger Station, which was a familiar, popular ranger station where you could get free firewood. and he was up getting free firewood. Got into a widowmaker, which is a tree that's still upright but has died on the inside. And most, at least a lot of Oregonians during that time, one of your summer jobs was working in some facet of the wood products industry. I worked 4 summers in a cabinet shop. 5th summer before I came to Westmont, I needed to make more money to pay for college. And so I went to work for International Paper. This was in a mill to the west of Eugene. And I worked in the powerhouse, and the powerhouse doubled as the first responders to accidents in the woods. And that's where I kind of had eye-opening experiences of how tragic and devastating lumber accidents could be. Well, Don got into a widowmaker, the tree came apart, came down and crushed him, leaving a wife and 4 children, ages 10 to 16 months. And it started an intense period of wrestling for me. It would lead to me meeting the man who would become my thesis advisor, Diogenes Allen. And I look back on that time as so amazingly disorienting and just so puzzling. But I also look back on it as the way in which God awakened in me a desire to find resources that could help me resolve all of the questions that arose because of the accident. Long story short, I would work through the problem of evil and suffering, come to just a wonderful, settled sense of the reasonableness of Christian belief and how you respond to the problem of evil and suffering. There isn't a complete answer, but there's a reasonable answer. And so I had resolved this, and in 1989, my father had a sudden cardiac arrest, went into full cardiac arrest, was never resuscitated, and died at age 60. And he was my favorite person, just loved and adored him. But what was interesting to me was it was devastating and disorienting for my mother and my sister, and it was certainly devastating to me emotionally, but it wasn't disorienting to me spiritually or intellectually. And I found that because of that, I had resources I had not previously had that allowed me to help my mom and my sister as they worked through their own grief and suffering. And it was a moment for me to actually understand that part of the purpose of evil and suffering in our own lives is so that we work through it to a place where when it happens to others, that we can actually assist them. And I think it's just one of the most profound learnings that I went through as a result of the tragedy that had, guess I forgot to move the slides. There's a picture of my mom and dad on when Pam and I got married, the day we got married, and this would happen about 9 months later. Picture on the left is the Thomas Fire, taken by Brad Elliott, and then one of the books, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, where he talks about just the importance of finding a why to live and how that actually helps us. And then finally, the Crucible of Personal Choice. One of the things Kahneman emphasizes is we play a what-if game. And the what-if game is if only, and then fill in the blanks. And he said we also believe that if there's one thing had just gone differently, it would have been a completely different outcome. And he gives a variety of examples. He said that too is almost never the case. One change almost never has monumental consequences all of its own. It can set in action a succession of supplemental acts, but one act on its own often isn't the decisive or determining factor in our life. Now, another area of real interest for me is neuroscience and emotional intelligence. And one of the things that I became interested in is amygdala hijacks. Now, this is not something that I have any proficiency in. I'm a lay reader in neuroscience. And so when I actually interface with scholars that are doing work in this area, it's fascinating to just see where the research has come from. But back in 1996, I was working at Azusa Pacific, and one of my responsibilities was to supervise graduate students. And I had a graduate student who had the most laid-back personality. And I was just, kind of struck by how easygoing he was, how he seemed to just never overreact to things. And then one day I got a call from his supervisor at his place of service, and the supervisor was saying, he had blown his temper, he had really just acted very unbecomingly, had basically cussed out the board of directors, and needless to say, was in a lot of hot water. And I said, I believe you, but I'm having a hard time believing you because this is so different than my experience of it. He said, we're meeting tomorrow at 4. Let me meet with him, and then I'll call you tomorrow night. So I met the next day with the individual, replayed what had been told me, and I was hoping he would say something like, no, you've got it all wrong. And he said, nope, that's exactly how it happened. He said, well, we've got to figure out a way to apologize, and if we don't figure out a way to apologize, I think you're going to have trouble holding on to your job. And he goes, well, I don't intend to apologize. And that Sunday, they terminated it. And so literally in 1996, I started thinking, what happened? How in the world did that happen? Well, Daniel Goleman had just written Emotional Intelligence. In 1998, he would write Working with Emotional Intelligence. And that started my interest in neuroscience and amygdala hijacks. And I just think it's interesting. One of the things that we've become more and more aware of, and in fact, I was even thinking about this as the President Trump, President Zelensky situation kind of unfolded Friday and over the weekend. Here are the 5 causes of amygdala hijacks. And by that, it's meant your capacity to control your emotional response, you lose it. Number 1, being treated unfairly. Number 2, being condescended to. Number 3, being shown a lack of appreciation. Number 4, being asked to meet unrealistic deadlines. Number 5, believing you are not being listened to on a consistent basis. Now, you think about both your own experiences of disrespect and then your observed situations where you've watched other people experience disrespect, and the fact that people get in these situations where they overreact really has a pattern to it. And so that actually influenced me in terms of really wanting to help students understand, and you'll see this in some of my other teaching tonight, begin to anticipate when you're going to be in situations where you will overreact or be tempted to overreact, and do visual role playing where you react differently. And if you can actually imagine situations that you'll end up in, and then you find yourself in them, even if they're not identical, you actually begin to develop a capacity for self-regulation that keeps you from making career-limiting moves. Now, in the case of this graduate student, what he did was a total career-limiting move. And then he doubled down on it by lacking the humility to actually say, I made a mistake. And part of, I think, self-regulation is controlling yourself so you don't overreact, but it's also, if you do overreact, trying to make amends, trying to come back from it. And so one of the ways that I believe we can come back from it is this book called How God Changes Your Brain. This is written by 2 professors at the University of Pennsylvania. And the lead prof on it was Andrew Newberg. And Andrew Newberg starts the book by saying, one of us isn't sure God exists. The other one is pretty sure God doesn't exist. But we can both prove to you that believing God exists is fundamentally good for you. That's their starting premise. And so what they do is they show that 12 minutes a day of prayer and meditation can help rewire your brain so that you actually can anticipate and practice emotional regulation so that you don't commit career-limiting moves. And they do the spectrum. They do nuns, they do Buddhist monks, they do truck drivers with anger management issues. And they even showed in the book the fact that truck drivers with anger management issues had been put on pharmaceutical drugs, and those had not worked nearly as well as 12 minutes a day of prayer and meditation. Anyway, it's just really, really impressive. Now here are just a couple passages of Scripture. James 1. Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So even there, the wisdom of Scripture actually suggests that having trials will be a place of proving, a place of development, a place of growth. Now, when I was writing the book, and I turned in the first draft to Cindy, she said, okay, where's your list? You clearly have ideas when you're working through things that you think about. And I said, well, that's true, but I would never put that in a book. It would give away all my secrets. And so she goes, I want the list. And so this is the list that I wrote that she wanted to see, really liked, and insisted it go in the book. And these are things that I have learned along the way. Some of them are ones I learned from painful experience. Others are ones that I learned from people, including my father. The first one's actually from the Sermon on the Mount. Enjoy today, tomorrow has enough worries of its own. And something that's just struck me is how often we get preoccupied with things that we're afraid will happen in the future. And we get so preoccupied with it, and then they never come to pass. And the fact is, we end up losing our ability to find joy in the moment because we're so preoccupied with what's coming. Number 2, never open a two-front war if you can help it. And this is really, if you have control of circumstances and you're in a tense situation on one front, try to avoid opening a second challenge or conflict, because it just becomes incredibly difficult to manage. When you have an open conflict, you don't know when it will end, nor how much energy it will actually deprive you. And if you can avoid it, try to just settle one conflict before starting another. Number 3, don't overreact to overreactions. There are so many times when people will break into a situation and just insist that this is the most offensive thing that's ever happened in the history of Westmont College. And then, 2 hours later, there's a different one. And so over time, I have just learned that if you can keep from overreacting to overreactions, you don't escalate situations and you can actually respond to them in a constructive way. Number 4, this is one that a lot of people say this makes sense to them. Don't say everything you think. I've never gotten in trouble for things I thought but didn't say. And that is so true. And if you can learn to discipline yourself to not say things, even when, often I've been surprised at how things resolve themselves if you don't escalate them. I've also been surprised at how people can hear you better when the emotion is out of the issue. But this requires discipline, and it requires a level of self-regulation that we don't naturally have. This is something that I believe can be developed through your own spiritual practices. Number 5, stay emotionally present, even when you don't feel like it. And I often think of my professional responsibility as a president is I show up in so many situations that would not be my first choice, but it's the expectation. And so all of us live with a certain level of expectation. And if you can actually get comfortable with the expectations that are placed on you, not resent them, celebrate them, look for the good in every circumstance, every activity, this will just make it a lot easier. Number 6, I've never had an opportunity to expand without a potential problem expanding with it. And I actually learned this from a class I took in my MBA program called Economics for Decision Makers. It's taught by an Israeli economist named Bella Gold. And Dr. Gold, his emphasis on this was the fact that people almost always overestimated revenue and underestimated expense. And from that basic economic principle, he taught like the wisdom of life. And this is one of those issues that you recognize you almost never expect the problems to expand at the same time the opportunities expand. All you can often see is this is a great opportunity. But in every situation, it's always that I've experienced, opportunities have been fantastic. They've always come with complexity that I hadn't first calculated. Number 7, be disciplined with what you share and with whom you share it. This is just literally be mindful. Don't be a gossip. And so many times people have ruined great opportunities by not being disciplined in this way. This one's from my father. Avoid no-win arguments. It's like wrestling with a pig. You both get dirty and the pig loves it. And he grew up on a farm in eastern Oregon that my grandparents had homesteaded during the Depression. And there are just a number of things that you learn working that close to the soil and with animals. But this one is one that he really believed, that some people, in fact, he was a public school superintendent, and so he dealt with people that had a variety of motives for why they were in education. And he said often when a person was underperforming, they would try to create a conflict that distracted you from actually a fair-minded performance review. And that's where this came from, was the recognition that people would try to create distractions that kept you from holding them accountable. Number 10, this is just what I've discovered over time. Cultivate an aspiring edge that stimulates hope and renewal. And what I've discovered is that individuals like institutions will stall out if they don't have within them just this innate desire to pursue the next horizon. And so you have to stop and celebrate. You have to celebrate the wins. You have to overcome the losses. But at the day, you always have to be looking for the next horizon to see what is the next period of growth and renewal that the college needs, that an institution needs, that a business needs. Number 11, maintain a commitment to open communication and conflict resolution. This is just the responsibility of leadership in any context, and you always want to be working to have people work together, not destroy community. And then number 12, always work to outlast the opposition, except when you know it's the right time to leave for the right reason. And this may sound kind of idealistic or even kind of gratuitous line, but here's what I've observed. I've observed people who are in leadership positions, they get targeted, they get discouraged, and they convince themselves that the best thing they could do for the organization is leave. Now, unless there's something illegal, immoral, or unethical, I have just never seen an institution absorb that well. And in almost every case, I would say the institutions where this has happened have gone backwards, and it has taken a period of real recovery before they found their growth edge. Now, it doesn't mean that you go on forever, but I think that if you can actually discipline yourself to stay present in difficult circumstances, it actually helps the institution get through a crisis. And when you get out of the crisis, then you can begin to think about what is the appropriate path going forward. Now, in Chapter 2, I do a great deal of work with Henry Kissinger's book on leadership. This came out in 2023. I hope I can write a 500-page book as I'm turning 100. And these are the 6 leaders that he, in the case of 5 of them, he worked with directly, and then in the case of Richard Nixon, of course, worked for him. But one of the things I wanted to amplify, the reason I wanted to highlight this book, well, there's so many great reasons, but one of the things that Kissinger focuses on is in each case, they all had a significant contribution to their life through their religious upbringing. And now, I think we all know Kissinger's reputation, so we didn't see him as a particularly religious man. I never heard him portrayed that way. But when he was here in 2013, we got to have him, he came to do a Mosier lecture series. And so I got to pick him up at the airport. And I was with Maury Jerkowitz, if any of you know Maury, and Maury had the nice car. I just wanted to meet Dr. Kissinger before the event. But we got to talking, and I just said, what have you discovered, or kind of what's new? And he literally started talking about this discovery, that these great leaders all had a devout religious upbringing, and he was totally captivated by that. And so one of the things that he talked about was the fact that de Tocqueville in Democracy in America talks about this being part of the uniqueness of America, that there are so many religious people, and what religious devotion actually teaches you is it teaches you a discipline that actually allows you to persevere. And it was just fascinating to hear him talk about that, and then 10 years later to see it show up in his book. Well, now back to Winston Churchill. Another great quote: "My success consists of going from one failure to the next without loss of enthusiasm." Now, that is one confident person. But as you read him, and this was interesting because Cindy and I disagreed about whether or not Churchill should be included in the book. And she finally relented and let me include it when I showed her that of the sources I was using, which was over 30 sources, all of them had been released in the last 15 years. And there was, I think his name's Andrew Roberts, wrote an 1,100-page biography about Churchill that came out in 2023. And so he still remains captivating to our imagination, and certainly to the Western world. But he had an incredible optimism. Of course, he was very disarming with humor. One of the other ones I quote is where he's early in his career. He's at a local, he's giving a speech in a local community, and one of the hecklers in the crowd says, "Vote for you? No way, I'd rather vote for the devil." To which Churchill responded, "Well, if your friend's not running, can I count on your support?" And exactly, I just say, what a great way to totally recapture the moment. And then the power of gratitude. I'll just conclude with this. What's interesting is to see the importance of gratitude and identifying experiences of gratitude, the way in which it wires you to actually have a positive outlook. Now, I learned this initially from Jane Wilson, who taught at Westmont for about 10 years after being involved in a variety of different educational endeavors before coming to Westmont. She became captivated by the work of Robert Emmons, the positive psychology professor up at UC Davis. We all know Bob Emmons that lives here, but this is Robert Emmons in Davis. And I have just appreciated so much Jane introducing us to all of the work that's been done in this area and how compatible it is with our sense of identity as a faith-based Christian organization. And then gratitude recognizes the contribution of others and our responses to key events, which contribute meaningful guideposts in life. And then here are just 3 and 4 in terms of researchers have found that cultivating a spirit of gratitude strengthens our perseverance by bolstering other positive emotions like joy and positivity, while counteracting negative emotions such as envy, contempt, and anger. Gratitude helps us endure well. And we're encouraged to pray for those who persecute us. That's also from the Sermon on the Mount. And when you think about what it means to actually kind of lay down your arms against a person who is at your opposition, that just takes an incredible amount of maturity to do it. And then finally, develop a mindset that values perseverance, learning to look for the positives in every situation, learning to control what we can control, our attitude and our effort, creating relational networks that provide support, encouragement, and appropriate perceptions of ourselves help us endure. Gratitude bears measurable fruit. And then here are just a couple of passages. We rejoice in our sufferings. And then just a few thoughts for reflection. But with that, I'd like to open it up for questions. Yes?
Recently read David Brooks' book, Having No First
Yeah.
another political author. And you had the opportunity to meet him. How did you get to know David Brooks?
We had David, I'd have to look, and Nancy, you may remember, was it 2014 when he came for commencement?
I think it was before that,
Well, I think his first foray into, it would have been 2012 then, 2013. He came for commencement, and he was, I know this is a mixed crowd, but you're all fan-friendly for Westmont, so you know we're faith-based. To speak at commencement, you have to be a confessing Christian. And so there was quite a bit of, is he not? Is he not? Because he's very open about the fact he was raised in Manhattan, in a secular Jewish home. They observe the Jewish holidays, not particularly with a lot of religious meaning, but then he went to an Episcopal school. And so he's super friendly to kind of Christian ideas. Well, he had started this progression of becoming, essentially a follower of the life and teachings of Jesus. And so that's actually what he said to me. I said, David, I don't know, this is an awkward question, but I need to ask, how do you respond to the idea of being a Christian or being a follower of Christ? And he said, I believe I'm dedicated to the life and teachings of Jesus, and I'm in process. So he came for commencement. Then we had him the following year at President's Breakfast. And then we've had him 10 years in a row at Lead Where You Stand. And so it's at least a 12-year process, and maybe longer. I'd have to get the dates back out. What I have loved about David, I don't know if you knew this, but if you read the book, he actually wrote the foreword for the book. So. The foreword actually gets at these wonderful conversations that have happened where we, unbeknownst to one another, just have curiosity in similar ways. I wrote my master's thesis at Princeton on Iris Murdoch. Well, a couple years ago, he was giving his presentation, and it was filled with material from Murdoch. Now, Murdoch got some of her most pivotal ideas from Simone Weil. And so in seminary, I had to study Simone Weil, Edmund Husserl, as this idea of phenomenology that infuses Weil's work and also Iris Murdoch. All of them influenced by Plato, but then Husserl's phenomenology really shows up in these other two. And David and I had a wonderful conversation about Murdoch and Weil and these ideas. And so there's just been some obvious ways in which we've been in proximity to each other, and then some surprising points of connection that have really been meaningful to us.
I'm glad there was a rub off there. Amazing talents. Thank you.
yeah, it was 2015, you were right.
What's that?
It was
2015? Okay. Yeah. Yes, Michael.
I love the intro to your book where you write, the rainfall began shortly after 3 a.m. And many of us remember that storm. I remember waking up, hearing that. Rain.
Exactly.
How did that kind of, and I thought the way you tied it in with the whole title of the book, how did that sort of shape the topic that you were
Very, very directly. Going clear back to the tea fire, Pam and the kids were actually at the president's house, and it came down. Of course, Bobby's here, who lost her home. She lives just up above us, and I think you were in Vietnam, weren't you? Or you were in Southeast New Zealand. Okay, in New Zealand. And I remember hearing Bobby as she came to her driveway and saw that her house was completely gone. The thing that was so interesting to me about the tea fire is it was hard to predict how people would respond, because everybody responded so differently. And then there was all of 231 homes in the neighborhood, 15 that were directly tied to faculty housing. And so that had a certain impact. But Michael, this is one thing that I learned during that time. Up until that point, those of you who are involved with the college remember that we had formed the Friends of Westmont because we needed to win the favor of the community. There was a lot of community opposition. Following the fire, once they realized it wasn't Westmont students, there was about a 36-hour period where they thought it was Westmont students because Sheriff Brown had said, 10 young adults ages 19 to 22. And any rate, I won't go into that, but it flipped. The community felt compassion for us. And it started what has resulted in we are now just widely embraced. We're viewed as a partner in the community. The start of the nursing program has just escalated the popularity of that. And we're just really viewed as a resource in a way that prior to that, some viewed us as a resource, some viewed us as a disruption. And so I have really appreciated that. You come to the Thomas Fire, we had time to get ready for it. We had 100 fire trucks, 500 firefighters bivouacked on campus. They were marching down the ridge line as the fire came from Ventura County. It came to just the north part of campus, burned the little open field above Page, came, I guess, within 2 feet of actually catching Page on fire. So it came back, but it didn't do any damage. It would have burned the house, possibly our house, the president's home, which is up above Page, well off to the slightly east of Page, but just above the Clark cottages. In the T fire, our house had gotten singed, but every house except Peter Jacobson across the street and our house burned. And so we knew we were in kind of the wind tunnel that's in harm's way, and you could feel it. The one that was the most bizarre was the debris flow. And it happened early in the morning on a Tuesday, the 9th. And the day before, we had actually honored the KEYT news team and the firefighters. We knew that this atmospheric river was supposedly coming. We didn't quite know how to calibrate it. And I think we still puzzle over it. The 23 people who were killed, the 100 homes destroyed, the 400 homes seriously damaged, all the debris. I mean, all of us that were here remember seeing how in the world did these boulders come down that were multiple tons. And so those are kind of the searing experiences of natural disasters, and you begin to think about them. And I attended 7 memorial services during that time. You think about the people who lost their life, some of them very dear friends. Just the Saturday before, I remember seeing Nancy at Ed Hayes' memorial service, and John McManigal was sitting right in front of me. Yeah. And so and John's was the first service I attended after that. And so but here's the other thing you realize is not everybody grieves at the same level. And so, I've really learned from that if you're grieving, others will minister to you. If others are grieving, it's your opportunity to minister to them. And that's really the way in which the human community shows up for each other. And I think it's God-given. Yes?
You have an ongoing theme when you talk about conflict resolution. And I think you said there are 5 components, something like that.
Amygdala hijacks?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
What do you consider the components of an effective apology? And it would be different, is it different if it's in a personal situation or in a business situation?
Could you repeat that just?
Yeah. What do you think of the effective components or the components of an effective apology? Oh,
an effective apology. Great question. Being willing to do it. I think that actually a willingness to say, look, this came out wrong. I'm sorry I overreacted. I hope that we can get back on equal footing, begin to really work to reconcile. Sometimes you can't. I mean, it's I think part of the anguish of the human community is there are sometimes that something happens, and this is particularly true, not so much in things that are just personally offensive, but in the chapter on human treachery gets at some of the worst experiences of betrayal that people experience. And I think betrayal is the hardest one to overcome. And in that chapter, I even talk about, one of the things that's interesting to me is Christ restores Peter but he doesn't raise Judas from the dead. Now, we never talk about why didn't Christ raise Judas from the dead? We ask almost every other question. And I don't know why Christ didn't raise Judas from the dead, but I think it's fair to say that he is viewed throughout the 2,000-year history of the church as being kind of beyond redeeming. And we are very comfortable with viewing certain expressions of human treachery in that way. I have found that being willing to apologize, being willing to own your role in a situation is not only helpful for the other person, but helpful for you. But I also say that don't apologize for things that you don't feel responsible for. Because if it comes off as hollow, that actually it's demeaning to you, and it actually is discerned by the other person.
Now, my sub-question to that is, and I'm not talking about what happened last Friday. I'm talking
Oh, the Zelensky-Trump?
Right.
Yeah.
Is your advice different in a business environment, in a work environment, than it would be in a personal?
Well, in that, and again, I only saw it on tape. I didn't see the whole thing unfold. I think it was one of those times where if Zelensky could do it over, that would be a time to don't get in trouble for things you think but don't say. And and as I mean, some of it was just the agitation. They talked about the fact he'd been on a military jet, or not a military jet, but a military transport coming in from Ukraine. He must have been tired. But I think, at least in the case of J.D. Vance, he made comments that people have said could have been offensive. And it was just a bad dynamic. Was it set up? I don't know. But for me, it's one of those where, boy, try your best to not say things that are going to escalate it. And then today, as we got in the car to come, they said that Trump has paused all military aid to Ukraine. And so it's just going to become a punitive atmosphere. We'll have to see how that plays out. But that's, I don't know that I could have done it any differently. Observing it after the fact, I think a teachable moment is that. And I'd say this, I start every morning with my own disciplines that include readings from Scripture, readings from key books that I'm working through, praying. These are disciplines that are consistent with my faith orientation. And a piece of it includes praying through my known calendar. And here is what I've experienced for me, is when I've prayed through the things I know are going to happen, it helps me in those situations, but it also helps me when I get thrown into situations that weren't on the calendar. And it helps me adjust. And so being able to visualize people I'm going to see, being able to anticipate those parts of my calendar that are known. I tell people the day almost never begins and ends the way you think it will when the students are on campus. There are always surprises. Maybe not every day, but a lot of days. Between commencement and the ramp up to the start of a new school year in mid-August, things begin and end pretty much the way you think they will during the summer. And figure out the rhythm of your work so that you can know how to anticipate at least the parts of your schedule that are known, because it will help you adjust to the parts that you don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes?
I was going to ask if you had any more to add now, kind of adding, with the problem of evil or whatever, that you spoke that to fortify yourself with endurance, ability to endure and ability to persevere, and to use those qualities to help others. So going through, hell and keep going and come out the other side so you can be strong enough to help others. Is there anything else that you think that you've thought of?
Well, I'll tell you, the best book I've ever read on it is a very awkward title for a wonderful book. It was written by my thesis advisor, Diogenes Allen. And it's called Traces of God in a Frequently Hostile World. Okay, that's like, couldn't somebody have helped him with marketing? But it is a fantastic book, and it walks through the various dimensions of evil. It draws on great thinkers in the history of the church. and also contemporary thought leaders that really help us make sense of the problem of evil and suffering, coming up with a reasonable understanding. And part of the framework that I wanted to prove that, you know, there was a perfect, complete answer. And basically what you come to is there's not a complete answer, but there's a reasonable way to think through it. And then the second part is when my dad died, my wife was in a counseling program. And she was in the second year, or getting ready to start the second year. It happened in September of '89. And this really helped shape her interest in starting grief recovery workshops. And so as she worked with me, she began to learn ways in which people actually heal. And she formally started doing grief recovery in 1994 and still does it. And so these grief recovery workshops really have understood the way in which the human spirit heals from some of the worst tragedies that humans can experience. And part of it is being in a setting with other people who have suffered loss and getting to tell your story with people who can empathetically understand. But it also, for those of us who come out of faith tradition, it also directs you to the spiritual resources that you find in God and gives you something that you can carry away from the seminars as you become more and more self-sustaining because of your relationship with God. And those have been two that I've learned since I started down this path.
Just to add on, I was going to ask you why you chose the term crucible.
It sounded better than struggle. And I actually had been in Karlovy Vary, a city near the German border in the Czech Republic, and I'd gone into a glass blowing factory and seen a crucible and loved it. And so the initial design of the book was actually the picture from one of the Karlovy Vary glass factories, and then the graphic artist at IVP turned it into the pattern that you see.
I thought you might have also wanted to use, and that's a good answer, thank you, to the fact that, you know, from a crucible gets up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it fit the description of a crucible. I go through that in the book. I mean, there's 3 different definitions that Webster offers, and I say all 3 fit. And as you experiences, painful experiences that you learn from, and that is at the heart of what the book is about. Is don't try to avoid these. Lean into them, learn from them. And if you learn from them, not only helps you heal, it also helps you help others heal. It can be a very powerful part of the community. Yes.
I was just curious, you talked about natural disasters, but no mention of COVID. How did COVID align with the dealing with those natural disasters?
Well, since this lecture was originally canceled because I contracted COVID, I'm very close to that, and I have fully recovered. I always got in trouble for my sense of humor. That's believable, isn't it? I don't know what to say. I mean, that's a great question. Go a little further of just the natural disaster part of it, or?
So the natural disasters of fire, it didn't take years. It happened and then there's time to recover. With COVID, it just kind of kept going. Did you find that as you were working with students, were they more resilient?
Oh, great question, because that actually goes to the heart of chapter 2, the whole principle of perseverance. I found you just had to persevere. And just like with the recovery from the tea fire, you had a total range. And honestly, it surprised me. Some of the students that I thought would be most enduring ended up being the most afflicted. And some that I thought would be very weak in their response ended up just really showing up in a big way. So it was unpredictable, which I've learned in other natural disasters. to contract COVID, we had so many protocols that if you got exposed, you had to isolate. If you caught it, you had to quarantine. And this was all before the vaccine had been developed and released. And so there was just daily counts. Everything had been pushed on Zoom, trying to create community. And this is one of the things Drucker, I had 4 classes with him as part of my MBA. But he said, a chief executive doesn't get to show up and say, what do I want to do? You have to show up and ask what needs to get done. And I felt that part of what our responsibility was showing up and saying what needs to get done. Now, we have a fantastic leadership team, and I love the E-team. And the E-team gathered every day to, how are things going? Where do we need to adjust? What are new trends that we need to follow? Any new regulations? We also had the blessing, I have colleagues in LA County that never were allowed to repopulate campus. We were allowed to repopulate campus in the fall of 2020, which made a huge benefit to people being able to experience community. We actually had students transfer to Westmont because their college or university was not meeting in person, and they were really feeling depleted by that. And so it's COVID for me was a test of perseverance of will we outlast it, even though it wasn't a person or an organization. It was a challenge that required us to outlast it, and then take the best information we had and respond to it. And I know to this day, some of the policies are controversial, and I will just always live with that. The ones that we were expected to follow made it possible for us to repopulate, and I'm just thankful that the county health office trusted us. We wrote our plan to repopulate was 147 pages long, but it spelled out how we would handle every situation, how we were preparing. Because the climate here is so mild, we developed academic tents. So we no longer taught in classrooms. We had whiteboards and big screen TVs for telegraphing or broadcasting the content, the course content. And students would wear their coats, come to class, sit in the academic tents outside, have fresh breeze, and almost nobody got sick, even though we were populated. And so, again, I think you have to show up every day, you have to innovate, you have to figure out how to try and come as close as possible to your core mission and make adjustments that seem reasonable to you. Yes?
This isn't a question, it's an expansion of what you said. For the community, you also pivoted to provide an excellent service. A number of your concerts were changed to be virtual.
That's true.
And the ever popular Christmas program.
With all the singers in masks. I'm glad you appreciate that. Is that Michael Dowd? I think it is.
So as I think about the Crucibles That Shape Us, it's easier to reflect on that after you go through a challenge. From your experience, especially dealing with some of the bigger challenges that occurred around Westmont, were you able to separate yourself and say, what's the gift in here? Or were you so engulfed in it that you have to go through to recovery at the end of the challenge to reflect on it?
I think that different people have different capacities. And I think I knew every day I needed to show up. And if I understood your question correctly, the part of what mattered to me was being sure that I was emotionally present every day, and that I was checking in with people, being sure that we were making appropriate responses, and trying to operate in a way that would instill confidence in others. Not in any kind of false way, but in truly, we believe we're okay, we believe we're going to be okay, and we have a plan and we're working the plan. And then just the habitual implementation of the 147-page plan. We were constantly reviewing it to be sure the protocols were in order, and we adjusted to it. Now, did I hear the question correctly?
You did.
Okay.
It was just a comment of being amazed at how many pages were in that plan.
Sitting next to Kim, our provost, is our VP of Enrollment Marketing and Communication, Irene Neller, who is responsible for all of our. But okay, if you back up to the T-Fire, back then we would do a live telecast, not a telecast, but a telephone call to our constituency. And it was a one-way call. You could call in a number and we would never hear you, but you could hear us. And we would give an update for the day. Well, people said, how did you know when to stop? Well, this is how we knew when to stop. The first day we did it, there were over 1,500 that called in to the number, even more students than we have. The second day, there were about 1,400, 1,300, 1,200, 1,100, 1,000. And then it went, or 1,000. It went to 918, and then it went to 18. And when we went from 918 to 18, we knew people were satisfied and we didn't need to do it. And for me, that part of the teachable moment in that is just pay attention to how much information do people need. They will tell you. And when they quit showing up for the calls, you know that you've communicated sufficiently. And so some of this is things you know, some of it is things you have to pay attention to discern. And that's just part of the process of staying emotionally present so that you don't miss any of the signals. Got 6 minutes?
Gayle,
Yes.
I forgot to mention the next Westmont Downtown.
Yeah, I also forgot to repeat the question. For Steve Baker's benefit, Scott Craig, will you let Steve know that I forgot to mention the questions each time? Next Westmont Downtown, March 27th, A Human Approach to AI, Understanding Its Promises and Perils by Mike Ryu and Guang Song, 2 members of our computer science faculty. This is such an exciting area and one in which we're trying to gain more and more understanding, and so I'm sure that'll be an exciting night. Is there a concluding question? One question that we could conclude with. Mike Ryu, you're here. Mike is going to be he'll be your guest presenter on the 27th. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, as I'm reflecting on all these wonderful lessons and my own personal choices as a young person, the students that I'm interacting with daily who are in the same ages where I made a lot of mistakes, and you had your children, so I'm sure there was a fair share of trying to mentor them. And as I reflect back, some of the not so wise choices made weren't for the lack of good advice that I had, like I'm getting from your book. So I'm really curious, as you mentor your children and now the students on campus, do you have any advice for getting the young people to listen to you and learn from the lessons that you learned, right? Not by their own choices, they're not so great.
Well, Mike, I have a wonderful question, and I often think about, I tell students this, and I say, if you want to have lunch, I'll figure out a way to have lunch. Addie Smith, my executive assistant, arranges them all. Some days I have 3 lunches, and so she'll, to avoid overeating, we usually get me a sandwich that can be put into 3 parts. So I eat a sandwich across 3 meals. But my point in that is people go, well, how do you have time for that? And on the one hand, I don't have time for it in principle. But the reality is a lot of students never take me up on it, but they like knowing the fact that if they wanted to, they could. And I think, and here's the reason I tell the story is the ones who take me up on it are the ones who are actually curious for wisdom. So I actually had 2 lunches and then coffee. And all 3 of the students were asking me really significant questions. And you can't make people want to learn this, but if you offer yourself and make yourself available, make yourself emotionally present to students, you are going to have students who are dying to have these conversations, are really, they are wondering how to have a successful life. And they're wondering, what went into you having a successful life? One of the things I always say is, if I ever have the privilege of interviewing you for a job at Westmont, one of the questions I'm going to ask you is, tell me about one or two mentors that have really mattered to you. And what I'm asking, I asked that question, yes, I'm interested in who their mentors were, but I'm actually interested in, do they have a teachable spirit? And if you have pursued mentors when you were younger, you almost always have a teachable spirit. And it's just so much easier to work with people who have teachable spirits. Well, thank you very much. Wonderful to get to be with you. Appreciate you coming out.